Hello, welcome back to my channel, Biblical Validity. And if you've watched any of my other videos, I had this kind of boring background of the wall of my cabin, and I decided to go out to the lake and shoot there. So actually, I thought I'd have a little fun. I found that I could put a picture in the background, and anyway, we'll just do that for tonight. Now then, this is part three of I think it's going to be a six-part series. And I'm trying to be very thorough about demonstrating that God not only exists, but he's also very personal. And so I'm going to present all kinds of evidence. And tonight I'm looking at the data-driven, I call it data-driven evidence for the supernatural. So if you watched the last video, we need to establish the supernatural if we're going to make a case for God existing, because God exists in the supernatural. So, and science, the science of astronomy and physics, really points very strongly toward, actually, it points toward the first sentence of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And so you'll find that in my part two video. I also did a short version of that called The Most Amazing Sentence Ever Written. Okay, so today I want to look at data-driven evidence for the supernatural. What are we talking about here? So I'm going to go outside of physics and astronomy and see what other stuff we can get into here. So there are other scientifically researched fields giving evidence for the supernatural. These are neuroscience, which is the science of the brain, near-death experience studies, and alien abduction studies. So I put alien abductions in quotes because I don't think they're actually alien abductions. Oh, I think they're demonic abductions, honestly. But anyway, well, I'm not going to settle it right now. Okay, while these results may not impress those in physics and astronomy who pride themselves on the hard science of observations and calculations, they should not be ignored. Now, I know that's a little bit of a provocative sentence, and but there are some brilliant minds out there in those fields, particularly physics, who that's the only lens through which they look at nature, at Earth, at the existence of the universe. They don't look at it through the lens of physics for the most part, and astronomy. And well, there's some other fields out there that give evidence. Okay, and that's what I want to discuss in this video. Okay, so for neuroscience, in 1951, Dr. Wilder Penfield, he's a science, a pure, a pioneer. Yeah, I'll get it right. A pioneer in neurosurgery, which is brain surgery, published the results of over 1,100 awake brain surgeries, in which he probed areas of the brain over an estimated million times. His basic results have been confirmed by other neurosurgeons. All right, so we'll get into that in a minute. As far as near-death experiences, they're not uncommon and have been studied since 1892. Large data bases of such experiences have been compiled over the years, and hundreds of journal articles have been published. And finally, the scientific journal articles have also been published on so-called alien abductions. While these studies focus on psychological issues, there are hundreds of instances which point to successful intervention by Jesus when his name is called upon. When I heard this, I thought, wow, that is amazing. So give me time, I'll get to it. I believe one can make a good scientific case that what appear to be genuine alien UFOs are far more likely to be supernatural demonic apparitions. But I'm going to cover that in a later video. So I'm going to go through all the science that I can think of that would be relevant to making a trip across the galaxy and from light years away. Is it possible? Is it possible for these objects in the sky to move around like they do? If we were in them, we'd be crushed to pulp by the acceleration forces. So anyway, I'm going to cover that in another video. Okay, so let's go into neuroscience. The Canadian-American brain surgeon, Dr. Wilder Penfield, pioneered and performed over 1,100 awake surgeries on patients before 1951 in an effort to pinpoint the cause and potential treatment of epilepsy. His sister had epilepsy, and she eventually died, and he was trying to find a way to. Apparently, she had a very strong case of it. tried to find a way to help her in that, and that partly motivated him. But he did a lot of focus on that. Um, Penfield, he really was a pioneer in that area, and he may have been the first one to really try to map the brain, where everything is in the brain, and some of those mappings are still used. I've heard in modern day, science education in that field. Okay, so by giving a patient a local anesthetic, not putting them to sleep, he can open up their brain, open up their skull, and poke around with a small electrical probe, which I believe he invented. And so it gave a little bit of a small electrical charge, and he and the patient could talk. They could converse during surgery because the brain has no pain receptors. So you could just have the brain open and you're probing in there, and you could just carry on a conversation. It reminds me of one of the last of the original Star Trek episodes called Spock's Brain, and kind of a bizarre episode. Anyway, well, let's don't go there. Okay, now each surgery lasted an average of about 8 hours, and the patient received maybe around 1,000 probes. So in his career, this was over 1 million experimental probes. So imagine repeating a scientific experiment over 1 million times. That's almost never ever done anywhere. Um, and but that's what he did over I don't know how many years he did this, but quite a few years, I imagine. He only got 4 types of responses, and there was no exception to this. Only 4 types of responses when he probed the brain. And what were they? Okay, so thus in over 1 million trials, Penfield was only able to stimulate one of the following. He could cause a muscle to move. He could make the patient raise their arm, or do something like that. And once he pinpointed where that was in the brain, he could make them do muscular things. He could stimulate certain memories, or some kinds of memories. It brought back things to the patient. He could stimulate a sensation or perception. And he also could bring out a vivid emotion. It might make them laugh. They might get angry. Just, it's stimulated emotion. What was he not able to stimulate? Okay. In no instance did such a probe ever stimulate abstract thought. Interesting. So this is evidence that some thought processes may take place in the mind, which may be outside the physical brain. So that word mind is kind of a hmm, kind of a red flag I think, to some scientists. Mind implies maybe there's a soul, maybe there's something in the supernatural, maybe we don't totally exist in our brain matter. Okay, I'm not sure that's exactly how mind is defined these days, but anyway. Now, I want to be fair. In 2001, I did a little digging today. In 2001, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, they published a study indicating that abstract thinking takes place in the prefrontal cortex of our brain. I'm guessing that's right here behind the forehead. And presumably, um, uh, Dr. Penfield never probed that part of the brain, never got down into there. So I think, well, that's a good study. Now, their study was only on monkeys, not on humans, so they didn't try to open up that part of the brain and poke around. Okay, thank goodness. Um, Penfield had a reason to open up their brains because he was trying to isolate where the epilepsy was taking place, and perhaps he could destroy a little tiny part of the brain where that was taking place, and then help that person overcome epilepsy. That was his motivation. So he had really good intentions there, and I think he had some success, as I understand it. Otherwise, I don't think he would have done 1,100 of those surgeries. All right, so their study was on monkeys, not humans. One must wonder if monkeys are actually capable of abstract thought, as we might recognize it. Now, I know they set up the experiments on the monkeys. They tried to teach them some stuff that might be interpreted as abstract thought, and then they were able to somehow stimulate that. So, but do monkeys really do abstract thought? Okay. Nevertheless, their conclusions appear to be the accepted consensus for humans at this time. Now, I'm kind of winging it on this because I didn't do a lot of deep dive research into this. I kind of guessed from Google searches that it's generally thought that that's where the the mind is, or the abstract thought is in the prefrontal cortex. I'm not convinced that's been proven demonstrably here by their experiment, because we're talking monkeys, not humans. All right. Now, scientific materialism or naturalism, I think they're probably about the same. It does not allow for scientific existence of the supernatural in which our minds may reside. So people who really believe in that, that's their worldview. They don't allow the supernatural in their work. They just think it doesn't exist. On the other hand, it is not conclusively proven that all abstract thought lies in the supernatural. Okay, so no, we can't totally prove that. Um, but consider this: people. This is interesting. I saw this years ago on a TV show. They had a woman on. Forgot the name of the host of that show. But consider this: people more often children have undergone operations where it was necessary to take out half of their brain due to epilepsy or some other disease, either the left side or the right side. And there were adults that this has happened to also. These radical surgeries do not seem to have any immediate impact on memory or abstract thinking. These people are also often able to regain a fairly normal life. Sorry, there I was seeing if that was a message from my wife on my phone. Sorry to interrupt like that. Where was that? These people are also often able to regain a fairly normal life. Some physical therapy is usually required. All right, so it doesn't. You would think losing half your brain would really do a number on you. Okay, whoa! But people recover from this. Pretty amazing. And so by removing half of a brain, it does not appear to affect abstract thinking or much else in any significant way, other than relatively small effects on memory, either improving it or degrading it. I think there's some other effects maybe on your motor skills as well. So it would seem that we have not located the seat of abstract thinking in our brains, unless both sides handle these tasks redundantly. So is abstract thinking handled equally in the left side and the right side? So if you lose one half, you still got the other half that works. I don't know. I can't answer that, but that's the only really explanation I can think of. Okay, so consider this also. Creativity, you would think, is a function of abstract thinking, and what we would normally just say is the mind. Great music, art, science, mathematics, inventions, all the thousands of creative pursuits and originality and personalities which are unique from person to person. Are these just neurons firing in 3 pounds of brain matter? um, there are some scientists who would just, yeah, that's what it is. Everything about our existence is up here in these 3 pounds of 3 pounds of brain matter, something like that. Okay. Well, now there are animals with larger brains than ours. Why aren't they smarter? Okay. So, oops. Ignore that. I'm sorry. I'm getting a text message. Just ignore the little ding there if you hear it. So there are animals with larger brains than ours. Why aren't they smarter? Okay. Now let's talk about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence in computers is just the capacity of a computer program to look for relevant word associations in order to mimic our thinking. I don't know if I've described that very well, but I think I was told by a computer scientist. He kind of distilled it down to something like this. And why am I bringing up artificial intelligence? Well, I got a reason for this. Okay, now computers are utterly incapable of independent conscious thought. I don't care what you think. We are not going to build a computer that can think and be creative like a human. It will mimic us, perhaps, and even artificial intelligence has the ability to learn. Like, for example, I think over time, an artificial intelligence-driven computer could learn how to play chess very well, just through experience. But they're not capable of independent conscious thought. They can only be used to try to mimic it. The physical aspect of artificial intelligence is just a large collection of electronic circuitry. Our brains are a large collection of cellular circuitry, both chemically and electrically driven. I hope that's right. I think it goes both ways, chemicals and electricity. Yet we have the ability to make independent decisions and be truly creative, something computer machinery can never do. All right, so we have this ability that they can never build out of just machinery. And so um, some scientific naturalists also believe in the doctrine of determinism, which means that all our decisions are ultimately made automatically through physical processes. So I'm going to tie all this together here. Artificial intelligence is deterministic, dependent entirely on the machinery and databases it taps into. So people create this stuff, they establish rules under which these things function, and that determines how it operates. Now you can build, I've done a little bit of computer programming in my past, and you can build some randomization into programs. And so you could, have it react a little bit differently each time to the same question based on random generators, number generators. And I don't know if that's done. It might be, who knows. But anyway, it's still deterministic and entirely dependent upon the machinery. Okay, now, if humans have free will, then our decisions are not automatically determined by natural physical laws. They're not automatically determined. And so let's see, is that a duplicate slide? Maybe. Interestingly, here's Dr. Penfield again. He also was able to provide consistent evidence of free will through his experiments over 70 years ago. And so he also did some interesting things there. I'll talk about that in a later video when I do one on free will. I think it's very interesting. He experimentally looked at this in his brain surgeries that he did. Okay, let's go on to near-death experiences. There have been instances throughout time where people who were dead somehow revived shortly thereafter. I imagine they're pretty rare until more modern medicine started catching up and we found ways to revive people. But near-death experiences, or NDEs, that's a common abbreviation for it, were first documented in France, I believe it was France, beginning in 1892, and are obviously far more common these days due to advances in medical technology. Sure, we have all kinds of ways to bring someone back to some kind of life and sustain them through various machinery. As many as 1,000 scientific journal articles have been published on this subject. Now, I couldn't really pinpoint that. I did a little Google search, and they didn't know if it was 755 or 1,000 or less, and I don't know. I'll just say as many as 1,000. It could be less. I didn't do a really deep dive into that. Some of these journal articles demonstrably prove that there is a continuing consciousness after both brain death and heart death. So I want to distinguish that. Not just the heart giving out, blood quits pumping. Generally, you're considered dead when that happens, but also the brain shuts down totally. No sign of brain activity. So why don't we go for both? If someone is brain dead and heart dead, what else can you say? They're dead. All right. And now, some of these articles detail solid evidence that an event or item was witnessed while in death that would have been otherwise unknown to that person. And by the way, Dr. Gary Habermas, I'll probably put his name down in the comments. He's a good source for near-death experience research. He's actually more known. He is the world's leading authority on the resurrection of Jesus. He's a historian, has studied his entire life, and he's currently writing about 4 or 5 volumes associated with Jesus and the resurrection. So this guy really goes deep. But he's interested in near-death experiences too. So I heard these two examples one time listening to him. So so one example is where a dead person in the hospital room witnessed a car accident outside the hospital, which was cleared before he consciously revived. The timing was during the interval when he was dead. They asked about it upon reviving. And so he woke up and said, "Hey, what happened to those guys in the wreck outside?" What are you talking about? They did some digging, and yes, there was a car accident outside the hospital at the exact time that he was dead on the table. They cleared it fairly fast, and later on he asked about it. He could not have witnessed that from the table when he was, unconscious or dead. And so that was was pretty interesting. In another example, the dead person saw a number or code near the ceiling facing up, beyond the sight or knowledge of anyone in the room. And this is an example through Dr. Habermas also. Upon reviving, he gave the correct code. Now, it may have been a she, I don't know. He or she gave the correct code, which was then verified by hospital personnel. So no one had knew about this. Maybe it was just that asset tag number on a fan blade to a ceiling fan, something like that. But anyways, up there, and they managed to see it during their while they were dead on the table, and they came back and recited the numbers. They went up and checked, and wow, he was right. How do you know that? And so that got published in a journal article. So, objections by skeptics who believe that near-death experiences are just memories generated by the dying brain just before shutdown are contradicted by this kind of evidence. So you can't just blow all that stuff off and say, well, that's just the brain shutting down. It's creating some memories or something like that. If you revive them, they'll remember. No, that's contradicted by this kind of you know eyewitness evidence. Okay. Now, not everybody being revived from clinical death has any memories. Okay, and those who do, some only remember seeing their lifeless body for a short time before he was revived, as well as hearing nearby voices. So they don't really go anywhere. They just kind of hover around the room and wondering why no one answers them when they call out, and then before long they're back in their body. Okay, that's kind of common, I think. Um, but many who have a near-death experience vividly recount traveling through a tunnel of light. There's that famous tunnel of light you hear about. These experiences vary. Now, many are welcomed by deceased family members or even Jesus. They may get a quick tour of heaven. They may get a really nice conversation with Jesus. And okay. Anyway, a minority of these minority of these people experience falling down a long hole and landing in what can only be called hell, a place of horrific sadness, torment, and hopelessness. And I've had to force myself to listen to these accounts. It's just horrific down there. It's worse than probably any horror movie you can imagine going to hell. But I thought it was important to hear about them. Obviously, we only know about those who claim a temporary visit to hell. Okay? And often they decide to call out to Jesus. At least one person kept hearing the word pray all the way down, falling. He had the word pray. I thought, I don't know how to pray. I've never prayed in my life. I never believed in any of this stuff. Pray. And and finally he just, he remembered the song "Jesus Loves Me." This I know, that he heard as a little kid, and he just did his best to pray. And these people see a bright light descending the deep hole, and Jesus rescues them, pulls them out of there. And some of these people, after being revived, when they come back to life, they end up passionately devoting themselves to the Christian life. And so it has a profound effect on them. And there's a few people who have written books about these experiences, and they're very compelling, very compelling. Okay, so all I just know is that you don't want to go, you don't want to end up in eternity in hell. Boy, it's bad news. Okay, what are we to do with all these vivid accounts? Do we just blow them off because, well, that's not real science? Well, yes, it is. Gathering evidence, cataloging evidence, um, stuff like that is science. It is science. There are so many of these NDE experiences that how can we write them off as a few meaningless anomalies with no obvious explanation? All of these NDEs involving consciousness after brain and heart death offer compelling evidence that we continue in a supernatural existence after death. That's right. So, what about alien abductions? Okay. When I was a kid, would have been in the 60s, and I think it might have been in Bartow, Florida, which is like within 100 miles of where I live. Some guy, it might have been 1967, and we talked about it at school the next day. This was in the newspapers, and he claimed to be abducted by aliens, and everybody just thought, this guy's a nut job, because it was pretty uncommon then for people to either have those experiences or at least talk about them. This guy was quite loud about it, and people thought, oh, are you crazy? Well, not so crazy. It is more common than you would want to know. Okay. So there is much room for scientific skepticism that these are actually powered by alien beings. Okay. Okay. That, in other words, there's a lot of room to be scientifically skeptical that these alien abductions are due to actual alien beings from other planets in the galaxy. All right, so I'm gonna give my full treatment of this issue in a later video. I want to talk about UFOs and why I don't really think those are aliens from other civilizations. Okay, just the science doesn't work. All right, instead now let's look at the subject of alien abduction. So I'm just going to concentrate on that for now. And alien abductions have been cataloged and studied for several decades. Even a highly credentialed Harvard MD studied these from his psychology perspective. And he published a book on it. I can't remember the author or the book, but you could find it, I'm sure, somewhere. Setting aside whatever psychology may or may not be in play, and I'm just not ready to go there because, one thing, I don't know much about psychology. There is one nearly consistent result that may be quite surprising. Okay, when I heard this, I thought, wow. So listen to this. In typical alien abduction experiences, the victim reports being abducted while asleep and waking on an alien spaceship where they are unable to move freely. The alien beings often appear to be like those grays, I think that's the name for them, depicted in popular media, beings with the hairless beings with the triangular heads and the big eyes and so forth. They frequently set about experimenting on their victims in various intrusive ways. Okay. Ugh. Anyway, one researcher I've listened to claims that of the 300 or 400 instances where the victim called out for Jesus, almost every time the experience immediately ceased and they were back in their bed. Just disappeared. Everything to do with aliens just suddenly disappeared when he called out for Jesus. Wow. Okay, gone, done, over. And so why would an alien listen to Jesus, if he was from another civilization? Um, well, there are a few exceptions to this rule, and got to be fair. And there's two theories, and I forgot what they are. One may have been hallucinations from drugs. I don't know. There's two other theories that explain these minor exceptions, but almost all the time, call out for Jesus, it works. Okay, if it doesn't work, there's probably a different reason that it won't work. All right, so I think, whoa, okay. So what do we do? What are we to do with this evidence indicating people are freed from this evil by Jesus? Is that not a supernatural experience? How can you just blow off a couple of hundred people and say, hey, this is what I did? And it worked. It worked. I'm not aware of anything else. I'm not aware of anybody called out to Buddha or Confucius or Allah or Muhammad or anything like that they got freed from it. I'm not aware of those. But call out to Jesus. Oh, yeah. Appears to work. Okay, so let's wrap it up. To wrap this up, we have cited statistical data that leans towards supporting a conclusion that there is a supernatural existence, even though we cannot detect the supernatural through physical instruments. Okay, so I wanted to cover this instead of just the physics and astronomy. I thought it was important to touch on other areas and of science that give evidence for the supernatural. And there's more than that, And um, yeah, we'll save it for later. Okay. Now, this was part 3, and as I say in the new YouTube world, be sure to like and subscribe if you want to continue watching these. You find them interesting. I don't know if I'll be at the lake next time. Who knows? But might be back in the cabin with my boring picture. And like and subscribe, and share with a friend if that makes sense to you, and leave a comment if you're driven to do that. When you do those things, it helps Google's algorithm um, decide what to publish out there and expose people to. So it helps get this stuff around if you like all this. All right, so what's next? In part 4 of this series, we shall give very strong evidence that our universe has evidence of design that is very strong and clearly from an intelligent mind. So I'm looking forward to that. Okay, well, I'll hope to see you next time. And roll credits.